land had gone brittle. Even the wind, what little of it stirred, moved like a tired thing dragging itself through skeletal trees and across the bone-minus-dry prairie. Dust gathered in the folds of cloth and skin, and the sun laid over the land like a warning. Clara Webb stood at the edge of the broken fence, one boot in the loose earth, the other catching on a root she hadn't the energy to fight. Her hands, raw from a morning's work, gripped the split-minus rail post like it might tell her something useful. Her back ached, though not as much as her chest. That dull, echoing pain had settled there since the day she buried her husband beside the cottonwood tree. It had been 7 months. A snakebite, fast and cruel. He died before she could boil the water. Now there was nothing but chores, dust, and 3 small mouths to feed. The barn leaned to one side, the roof patched with tar paper that refused to stay. The well coughed up more air than water most mornings. The hog had gone missing last week, just up and vanished, and the hens laid fewer eggs each day. The baby Ida had taken to waking in the dark hours, crying so sharp it sounded like something breaking. And the boys James and Eli did what boys do when the world stops making sense. They started to drift. She had thought once that the land would save them, that it would be enough planting, mending, working until their backs bowed but their spirits didn't. But the land had turned hard and selfish. Her hands dropped from the fence. She turned and made her way back toward the house. The porch creaked beneath her. One board gave way beneath her step, and she caught herself on the frame. Her fingers left a smudge of blood on the door. Inside, the room was half minus shadow, half minus mess. A pot of beans sat forgotten on the stove, cold. A crust of ash from the fire ringed the hearth. The table bore the burden of unpaid bills, a snap button, a broken toy horse. James sat beside the window, staring out like he expected something to come over the hill, someone maybe. His small face had thinned out since spring. He didn't look at her when she passed. Clara scooped Ida up with a heaviness in her limbs she didn't know how to shake. The baby clung to her neck, sticky minus cheeked and warm. Auntie got no more in me, she whispered into the child's hair. Not a drop left. Outside, the light had gone strange, pale and sideways. That early winter kind that made everything look like it might vanish soon. She sat in the rocker and held Ida tighter, until the baby squirmed and cried again. "I know," she murmured. "I know, baby. I hear you." But there was no one to hear her. By evening, she had fed the children what was left of the bread and poured water from the last good bucket. She had pulled the quilt over the boys and kissed their foreheads like it might help. It didn't. She went back outside when the stars came. The sky stretched forever, but she felt more trapped under it than sheltered. Clara leaned against the porch post and stared at the black cut of the hills. She thought of her husband, and how he used to come home with dirt in his hair and kindness in his voice. She thought of the way his shoulders filled the doorway, and how safe that had once made her feel. A sound came from down the trail, a scraping faint but real. She straightened, heart tight. No one came down that road without cause. Not at this hour. Not in this place. The scraping came again. Then a figure appeared at the edge of the dock, a man, tall and slow minus moving, leading a mule that looked worse for wear. He did not speak at first. Just stood there in the gloom, hat low, face unreadable. Clara's hands balled the fists at her sides. She didn't have the strength to be afraid any more, but she could be angry. That she had in plenty. The man raised a hand not in threat, but in tired greeting. "Even in," he said, voice rough like gravel. "I don't mean trouble. Lost my trail and came upon your fence. Thought to ask if there's water nearby." Clara stared at him a long time. "I ain't much left," she said, "but there's some." He nodded once. "That's all I need." She didn't move, just watched him, the way his shoulders sloped like he was used to carrying too much. Something about him didn't sit right, but she couldn't say what. Maybe it was the way he waited, not like he expected kindness, but like he didn't expect anything at all. "Your mule won't last long without rest," she said finally. "No," he agreed. "Nor will I." She stepped back, just enough to let the porch light touch him. "Then come on." The man didn't rush. He moved slow, like every step had to be considered. The mule dragged behind him, ribs showing, one eye clouded with age or injury. Clara held the door open just long enough for them to pass the threshold of the yard, then let it swing shut behind her. She filled a tin pail from the well's meager offering and set it near the trough. The man crouched, cupped some water in his palm, and let the mule drink from it before letting the beast bury its nose in the pail. He waited quiet until the animal finished. "You from these parts?" she asked. "No," he said. "South of Cheyenne mostly. Used to be." She watched him with arms crossed over her chest. "Used to be," she echoed. "Means UAINT anymore." "Not since the fires." She didn't ask what he meant. The way he said it, like something final, didn't invite questions. He finally stood and turned to her, hands empty. "Name's Silas." Clara didn't offer hers. She gave a short nod and jerked her chin toward the shed. "You can sleep in there. Hay's moldy but dry. If you steal from me or hurt my kids, it'll put a hole in your chest." Silas looked at her, then at the house. The windows were dark now, quiet inside. "Understood," he said with no offense in his voice. "Just fact." She watched him settle his mule, spread a blanket on the floor, and tuck himself into a corner like HED done it 1,000 times. She waited until he was still before she turned back toward the house. Her feet dragged on the porch boards. Sleep didn't come. She lay still, eyes fixed on the cracked ceiling, one hand always resting on the rifle beside the bed. In the morning, Silas was already moving. She spotted him stacking kindling by the stove without being asked. He made no noise but left a line of boot prints on the wood floor. "You know your way around the firebox?" she asked. He didn't answer, just lit the stove without fuss and backed away. "I didn't ask you to do that." "You didn't have to," he said, and left the room. Later, he fixed the fence. The boys watched him from behind the sycamore, silent. Eli, the younger, finally crept forward, curious. "What's your mule's name?" Silas paused, hammer still in hand. "Caleb." "Like from the Bible?" He nodded. "My brother picked it. Long time ago." "Your brother's still around?" "No." Eli didn't ask more. Just stood beside him, watching the way Silas's hands moved, slow, careful, like he didn't want to break the world by accident. By midday, Clara came out with cornbread and what was left of the dried apples. Silas took it, nodded, and sat in the shade without complaint. "You planning on moving on?" she asked, not looking at him. "I reckon," he said, "but I don't mind working a while if you'll let me. Don't need much." She studied him, looking for signs of something hidden: greed, cruelty, weakness. But all she saw was a man who moved like he carried old pain and didn't expect it to ease. "You break that fence proper and fix the barn roof, you can stay through the cold," she said. He gave a nod, not like a man grateful, but like a man relieved not to keep walking. That night, Clara didn't lock the door, and the next day, he was still there. The days began to gather rhythm. Silas didn't speak much, but he worked. With quiet skill, he repaired what had been sagging or broken. He taught James how to sharpen a blade without nicking the edge and showed Eli how to patch a split boot sole. He let out a grab at his thumb with sticky fingers and didn't flinch. Clara noticed the difference without meaning to. The woodpile grew. The coop stopped leaking. James smiled more, and Eli stopped chewing his fingernails. The baby slept longer, like she sensed the house had steadied, even just a little. Still, Clara didn't trust the peace. It felt borrowed, like the way sun breaks through storm clouds only to vanish again. One morning, as she was washing clothes in the cold basin, Silas brought her a cracked photograph in a weathered leather pouch. "This was mine," he said. "Used to be my wife and daughter." Clara stared at it. The image was faded, a woman with strong eyes and a little girl with her arms around a dog. The edges were worn smooth by time. "What happened?" she asked. Silas didn't answer. He folded the photo and returned it to his coat. "I try not to tell that part." She let the silence rest between them. Sometimes the worst stories didn't need telling to be understood. "Me too," she said. "If the frontier stirred you, subscribe and keep writing." By mid-November, the wind sharpened. It pushed across the flatland like it meant to strip the skin off anything left standing. Clara pulled Dexter quilts from the chest, ones her mother had pieced together from feed sacks and old dresses. She didn't care if they matched. Warmth came first. Silas worked longer hours, climbing to fix the barn's slope with the precision of a man who didn't mind being alone with his thoughts. He barely spoke unless spoken to, but when he did, the words held weight, not noise. The boys had taken to following him, pestering him with questions about how to fix a cracked yoke or if coyotes could eat a cow whole. He never scolded, never spoke down, just answered plain, then handed them tools to see for themselves. Clara noticed his quiet care. A busted boot mended without mention. An extra row of firewood stacked by the kitchen door. His blanket tray minus stitched where the seam had given. He never said it was him, but she saw. One evening she caught him outside, staring at the hills with his coat unbuttoned despite the cold. "You're not just passing through," she said, arms folded tight against her chest. He didn't turn to look at her. "No, I suppose I'm not." She stepped beside him. The air smelled like snow, brittle and close. "Why this place?" Silas shifted, not defensive, just quiet. "It's still standing." "That's not much of a reason." "No, but it's better than most." She waited, hoping he'd offer more. He didn't. "What happened to your family?" she asked. He rubbed a thumb over the worn handle of his knife, still sheathed at his side. "My wife got sick. Fever took her fast. We buried her in the orchard." His voice sounded more worn than sad. "My girl. She didn't want to live after that. She ran. Got caught with a crowd full of rough men south of Rollins. I was 2 days too late." Clara's stomach dropped. She didn't speak. She just breathed and let it settle in. "I thought about putting a bullet in my own head," he said after a moment. "Didn't. Still don't know why." She looked up at him. "Maybe 'cause something in you still wanted to build." He turned, finally, his eyes meeting hers. "That's so? You fix things like it matters." He almost smiled. "Don't know any other way." That night Clara sat awake by the stove, holding Ida close while the wind howled. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in a long while, the edge of being seen. They didn't speak of it again, but the air between them changed. Not softer, not sweeter, just clearer, like a fog had lifted. Days turned over like pages. Thanksgiving came with a rabbit stew, half a loaf of bread, and a jar of peaches Clara had hidden away. Silas didn't say a word during the meal, but when Eli asked if they could thank God for something, he nodded. "Thank him for mamas who don't give up," James said, mouth full. Clara ducked her head, cheeks hot. Silas said nothing, but when she met his eyes, there was something in them that steadied her. Later that week she found him near the creek repairing a trap. He looked up as she approached, his sleeves rolled, forearms streaked with dried mud. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Most folks say INT," he replied, tightening the spring. "You don't talk much, but when you do it counts." He smiled then, just a flicker. "Same could be said for you." She crouched beside him, watching his hands work. "I used to think if I just kept everything going, the pain would stay buried, but it doesn't." "No," he said, "it waits." Clara's breath fogged in the air between them. "Still, something about having you here, it's like the house stopped creaking so much." Silas didn't look up. Houses feel the weight of loneliness same as people. She stood, brushing her hands on her skirt. "You ever think of starting over?" He finally looked at her straight on. "Not till lately." They stood there quiet, as the wind stirred the yellow grass around them. Neither said what was happening, but both felt it. Winter pressed and harder come December. The sun barely climbed past the hills before sinking again, leaving behind long shadows and bitter nights. The chimneys smoked constant, and the creak of the roof beams became a part of the house's voice, like it was sighing under the weight of the cold. Silas built a windbreak on the north side of the house. He didn't ask, just saw the need and did it. Claire watched him from the window, his frame hunched against the wind, sawdust catching in his beard. She didn't offer to help. She knew enough to let a man be alone when his hands were busy and his mind quieter than his mouth. At night, they'd sit across from each other, not close, not far. Shed men's socks, whittle or sharpen a tool. The boys would drift to sleep by the hearth, and Ida curled up like a kitten in her mother's lap. One night, after the children had gone quiet, Silas spoke. "I dreamt of my wife last night." Clara looked up from her stitching. She was hanging laundry. same way she used to. Hummed a song I can't remember the name of, but I knew it in the dream. He didn't say more, just stared into the fire. Clara set her work down. Do you miss her? He didn't answer right away. Then I miss who I was when she looked at me. Clara let the words sit. I reckon I understand that. You do? I wasn't ever the prettiest girl or the smartest, but Hanky saw something in me. Like maybe I mattered more than just keeping a roof and raising babies. She folded the mended saw. After he died, everything got quieter. Except the heart. Silas nodded. Slow. It stays with you, but it changes. How? It softens. Or maybe you just get stronger. She looked at him then, his face lined in half in shadow, but not hard. There was a gentleness there that didn't beg to be noticed. It just existed, quiet and firm. James asked today if you're staying. Silas glanced up. And what did you tell him? I told him that's not my choice alone. The room held stillness like breath held too long. He said, I ain't got much, but I'd been around enough lost to know when something's worth keeping. Clara stood then, gathered her thread in the worn socks. She paused at the edge of the room. I ain't asking for promises, but I wouldn't mind it if you stayed through spring. Silas didn't rise, just nodded once. He'll be here. And he was. Through snowfall and frozen pipe, through sick calf and a stuck gate. He was there when Eli fell from the hayloft and split his lip. He stitched it with a steady hand, the boy not even crying. Clara watched him gently cradle the boy's head, whispering something she couldn't hear. She found herself waiting for his voice in the mornings, counting his steps as he crossed the porch, feeling her spine settle when he entered the room. But the peace they found couldn't keep the world away. Word spread. A neighbor, worse on Hale, rode up one Sunday, mouth full of questions and suspicions. "Hes a drifter," he said to Clara while Silas was out back tending the mule. "You got children, Clara. You can't just let any man hole up with you." "Hes done more work around here in a month than most men do in a year," she answered. "That don't mean Hes safe. You know the type." They were quiet like a disguise. Clara stepped down from the porch, standing on level ground. "I know danger when I see it, Orson. And I know kindness too." Orson looked past her toward the barn. "Don't say I didn't warn you." She didn't answer. When Silas came in that night, she told him. He didn't get angry. Just sat down, took off his coat, and rested his hands on his knees. I ain't running," he said. "But they'll go if it keeps you safe." Clara shook her head. "I've had enough of men leaving." He looked at her, eyes steady. "Then he'll stay." And something in her heart, long frozen, began to thaw. January came like a hammer, driving snow into every corner of the farm. The creek iced over, and even the cattle huddled together, their breaths fogging in the cold. Clara woke before dawn, hands raw from scrubbing clothes in freezing water, back stiff and lungs tight with the chill. She carried Ida inside, tucked her into the quilt, and drew a deep breath before stepping into the kitchen. Silas was already there. He had stoked the fire and was leaning over the stove, frying some strips of bacon. The aroma seeped into Clara's bones, and for a moment she almost forgot the endless weight of survival. "Morning," he said, voice low. "Morning," she answered, a single word feeling awkward on her tongue. It had been months since she spoke without command or necessity. The boys soon joined, rubbing their eyes, dragging themselves to the table, still half minus asleep. Clara watched Silas serve them breakfast, noting the small gestures, patting James on the shoulder, nudging Ella's chair closer, careful with the baby in her lap. She realized she had come to rely on it, his quiet attention, more than she'd ever admit. By mid-minus morning, a commotion came from the fence line. One of the neighbors' cows had wandered onto their property, and Dorson Hale was already there, angry, hollering. "Tell me you're going to do something about this man," he demanded, pointing a gloved finger at Silas. "I ain't right, letting him stay. You got children, Clara. You can't just trust him." Clara's jaw tightened. She knew the truth. Her son's threats weren't born of kindness. The man had always carried suspicion for anyone new, anyone strong enough to challenge him. "You'll handle the cow," she said, voice steady. But inside, a battle raged. The notion of defending Silas from more than just cattle, the world's judgment and the whispers of neighbors, was exhausting. She had felt her resolve waver before in the long nights, but she refused to let it break now. Silas stepped forward. "You'll move her," he said calmly, walking toward the cow without a word of complaint. His shoulders squared, his hands sure. Clara followed, the boys trailing. Even Orson, noticing Silas's deliberate control, fell back a pace, muttering under his breath. As they worked, Clara's gaze softened. She had learned to read him, not the quiet words, but the small signs of character. The way he eased the animal without panic, how he guided it back onto its own land, how he never blamed her or the boys. By nightfall, the cows were back where they belonged. The wind had shifted, and a pale moon cast silver over the snow. Inside, the house felt warmer, not just from the stove, but from the quiet companionship that had become a shield around them. They sat together after the children slept, neither speaking, simply letting the fire crackle. Clara took a deep breath. "I was afraid," she admitted softly. "Afraid they'd rely on you too much. Afraid to trust after Hank." Silas's eyes met hers, calm and unflinching. "Afraid that's fine," he said. "It means you still care. It means you're alive." For the first time in months, she felt the weight in her chest ease a little. She reached out, hand brushing his across the table. A small, deliberate touch. He didn't pull away. Winter stretched long and cruel, but they found small joys. Silas fixing the barn roof in the snow, the boy sliding down the hill behind the house, Ida laughing, breathless and unafraid. Clara learned to trust the rhythm, the ordinary acts of life, as if they could stitch together the broken days. Then came the letter. It arrived on a brittle envelope, postmarked from Cheyenne. Clara unfolded it with hands trembling. It was from her sister, warning her that an old creditor was pressing claims against the farm. If not paid soon, the land would be lost. Clara read the words twice, then sank into the chair, breath caught. The walls, once protective, suddenly felt small, the fire insufficient. Silas appeared in the doorway, saw the paper in her hands, and quietly came to her side. Without a word, he took the letter, read it, and set it down. "Well, fix this," he said simply. "We'll figure it out together." Clara's throat tightened. The promise hung between them like the winter moon, steady, cold, and certain. She wanted to believe it. She had to. They spent the next days planning, talking with neighbors, tallying what the farm could produce. Silas worked tirelessly, showing a patience and resolve Clara had never seen in a man. The boys pitched in, Clara directing with calm authority she hadn't known she possessed. And slowly, they began to see the farm survive, to breathe again under their care. It was exhausting, frightening, and exhilarating. And through it all, the quiet bond between Clara and Silas grew deeper than words, rooted in shared labor, mutual respect, and the fragile hope that they could carve a life on the stubborn land. By February, the snow had packed into drifts along the fence lines, and the wind carried a bite that bit through coats and quilts. The children had learned to play quietly indoors, carving toys from scraps of wood Silas left on the table. Clara moved between them, the stove, and the barn, always aware of the frozen world pressing in from outside. Silas was tireless. He fixed leaky roofs, patched split boards, and cut wood with a precision that seemed to come from memory more than skill. He rarely spoke, but when he did, it was to guide a boy's hands or advise Clara on the best way to mend a fence post before the thaw. One afternoon, a stranger rode up the snow-laden rail. Clara caught sight of him from the window and tensed. He was young, dressed, and unfamiliar. His horse's hoofs scuffed the snow as he dismounted. "Mrs. Webb?" he called. Clara stepped onto the porch. "Who wants to know?" "My name is Tom Bennett," he said, tipping his hat. "I represent the land company. Your property is in arrears. Payment is due immediately, or the deed will be transferred." Her chest tightened. "How much?" $400, plus interest. Clara blinked. Her mind tried to count, to remember what she had on hand, what might be sold or traded. Nothing added up. Not close. Give me time, she said, voice firm but brittle. I'll find a way. He looked at her and then at Silas, who had appeared silently behind her. Time isn't your friend. You understand that, don't you? Silas stepped forward, unflinching. Just finding a way. Best you leave. Tom's gaze flicked from Silas to Clara and back again, sizing them both. You don't know what you're dealing with. I know he'll die trying if I have to, Clara said. The man frowned but left, boots crunching in the snow. Once the sound faded, Clara sank against the porch post. She couldn't breathe. Silas came to her side. Well, get through it, he said. His hand brushed hers, just a flicker of contact, but enough to steady her. I'll figure a way to keep this land. That night, they worked by lantern light, tallying the store of flour, dried apples, eggs, and what the farm could still produce. They counted the value in every log stacked, every chicken coop repaired, every bushel of corn hidden from the wind. You're planning to take care of this yourself? Clara asked quietly, rubbing her forehead. Not alone, Silas said. We do it together. It was the first time Clara felt a real pulse of hope in months. They moved in tandem. He cut wood, she packed provisions, the boys fetched buckets, and Ida slept through it all, her small chest rising and falling like a promise. The weeks were punishing. A blizzard came one night, whipping snow through the barn cracks. Silas rode out to check on the animals. Clara bundled the children and prayed the walls held. By morning, the snowdrifts blocked the trails entirely, but no animal had been lost, and the barn had survived. One evening after the storm passed, Silas stood outside, snow crusted on his boots and coat, and watched the children play in the fresh powder. Clara joined him, brushing a curl from her face. You've done more than I could have imagined, she said. Not just for me, for all of us. He looked at her, silent for a moment. And I've done what I could. You've done the rest. You've kept this place alive. Her heart tightened. For the first time, she realized that she wasn't alone anymore. Not fully. Not in the way she had been since Hank died. She took a deep breath. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't, he said. You don't need to. Just keep living. That's enough. Clara's gaze fell on the children. They laughed in the snow, breath steaming in the cold, small hands shaping snowballs, building forts. They were alive, and despite the threat of the land company, despite the hardship, despite all that had been lost, the warmth of survival, of family, and of unexpected companionship filled her chest like sunlight. She turned to Silas. He looked back at her, eyes steady, strong, and unyielding like the hills beyond. She felt something shift, a bond unspoken yet undeniable. It was not love announced loudly, but the quiet understanding that two people, battered by life and loss, had found a tether in one another. A tether that might just hold against the storms yet to come. Outside, the wind moaned across the plains, but inside the house the fire crackled warmly. The children slept, the animals were safe, and for the first time in a long while, Clara allowed herself to hope. Spring came slow and tentative, like a promise whispered over frozen soil. The snow thawed in patches, leaving behind mud thick and clinging, but also the first signs of green crocuses pushing through the earth, tiny shoots of wheat in the field, the maple buds swelling with life. Clara spent long hours outside, repairing fences and hauling water, Silas at her side, working with a rhythm that felt almost natural, as if the land itself accepted them. One morning, as the sun burned a pale light across the horizon, she noticed Silas standing near the barn, looking toward the hills. His face was relaxed in the sunlight, lines softened by a fleeting smile. Clara approached him, careful not to disturb the quiet. Thinking? She asked. Planning, he said. The creek will flood once the snow fully melts. We need to reinforce the banks or risk losing the lower field. She nodded, knowing he was right. We can do it today. Together. He glanced at her, then eyes steady. Together, he repeated, as they worked side by side, hauling stones, pounding stakes, and guiding the muddy water with boards and trenches. Clara felt a sense of shared purpose that filled the long winter's absence. The boys fetched trucks, laughing at their own clumsy efforts, and even Ida found small sticks to drop into the channels they dug. By noon, Their bodies were coated with mud, sweat, and sunburn, yet the field was secure. They stood together, hands on hips, surveying the work. For the first time in months, Clara felt a quiet pride, a small triumph against the weight of circumstance. That evening Silas stayed longer by the fire than usual. Clara watched him, the flickering light painting his face in shades of amber and shadow. "You've changed this place," she said softly. "Not just the land, but everything." He met her gaze, still unflinching. "You've done that too, Clara. You held it together when I thought it might fall apart. You've got more strength than most people I've known." Her hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the warmth of being seen, truly seen. For years she had buried herself beneath chores, children, and grief. And now here was someone who acknowledged it, without judgment, without expectation. They did not speak for a long while, just sat near the hearth watching the fire. The children slept, tired from the day's work. Outside, the wind carried a softer promise, the air thawing with the first sense of earthen growth. Then, one night, Silas spoke in a voice low and careful. "Clara, if you ever wanted to consider something more with me." She looked at him, heart pounding, breath caught in her throat. The weight of months, the sorrow, the survival, the quiet trust, all seemed to hang in that small, uncertain moment. "I've thought about it," she admitted, "more than I should have allowed myself. But I see what you've given us in me. I can't ignore it any more." His hands reached for hers, calloused and worn. "I never asked for much," he said. "Only a chance." Clara nodded. "Then you've got it." That night the house seemed to sigh, the walls no longer creaking under the weight of loneliness. The children dreamed peacefully, oblivious to the complicated turns of adults, yet safe in the quiet reassurance of care. The next days brought challenges. The land company pressed closer. Winter's last thaw threatened the creek banks, and the farm still demanded every ounce of strength. But Clara and Silas faced it together, sharing the labor, the burden, and the small, unspoken joys. One afternoon, as they repaired a gate together, James tugged at Clara's sleeve. "Mama," he said, eyes bright, "are you happy?" Clara paused, looking at Silas, then at her children. A smile touched her lips, unforced, real. "Yes," she said, "I am." And in that moment, the farm, the wind-minus swept hills, the small house filled with children and hope, seemed to settle into something that resembled peace. Not perfect, not without fear, but alive and steady. Silas rested a hand on her shoulder, and she leaned into it, letting the quiet warmth of trust and love wrap around her. The future remained uncertain, but it was theirs too, shaped together, bound not just by circumstance, but by the slow, steady accumulation of care, effort, and shared understanding. Outside, the prairie breathed in the first green of spring, wind moving through grass and trees as if to bless what had been built from sorrow and perseverance. Clara let herself imagine the seasons to come, children running through fields, the house alive with laughter, and a life not dictated by grief, but shaped by quiet resilience, and the love that had grown slowly, patiently, like roots deep in the stubborn earth. Spring turned fully to early summer, and the prairie burst in shades of green and gold. The creek that had threatened their fields now sang gently, carrying the thawed snow toward the distant hills. Clara moved with a rhythm she hadn't known since the first days after Hank's death. Each task still bore the weight of survival, but now there was a lightness underneath, a pulse of possibility, fragile but real. Silas had become more than a helper, more than a quiet presence. He shared the labor, the decisions, and, slowly, himself. One afternoon, as Clara repaired the fence along the eastern pasture, Silas came beside her carrying a bundle of planks. He didn't speak at first. His hands were steady, placing each board carefully, aligning the nails with a precision born of patience and past hardship. "You're very good at this," she said finally. "Have to be," he replied, "or the land reminds you in a way that hurts." She nodded, thinking of the months they'd endured, the cold, the hunger, the threats, the isolation. And yet here they were, stronger, steadier, a patchwork family stitched together by necessity, hope, and growing affection. The boys ran ahead, Eli chasing a bird and James keeping pace, laughing. I'd a toddle behind, scraping a stick through the dirt, squealing with delight. Clara watched them, heart swelling, and felt a quiet gratitude that went deeper than words. That evening after supper, Silas gathered the children by the hearth and began telling a story, his voice low and deliberate, winding through the adventures of a lone rider who braved storms and wilderness. The children leaned in, rapt, eyes wide, imagining each valley, each river crossing, each night under the stars. Clara listened from the doorway, smiling softly. Afterward, when the children had been tucked in, she found Silas outside, leaning on the porch railing. The night was warm, and the air smelled of fresh earth and wildflowers. "You ever think about staying for good?" she asked, her voice soft. He looked at her, eyes steady. "I've thought about it. Never knew if I'd want to. Now I do. This is enough." She took a deep breath, feeling the words settle in her chest. "It is, and it could be more, if we let it." He smiled faintly, not a grand gesture, but enough to light the shadowed corners of her heart. "You'd like that." They worked together through the following weeks to prepare for the land company's visit. Every ledger checked, every crop counted, every repair noted. Silas taught Clara to calculate the value of the harvest, to make every ounce of effort matter. Together they fashioned a plan, a lifeline to preserve what they had worked so hard to protect. When the representative arrived, Clara met him with resolve. Silas stood behind her, silent but solid. The man scrutinized the farm, counted the cattle, inspected the fences and barns, and questioned them sharply. Clara answered each inquiry, careful, precise, a steadiness she hadn't known she possessed. Silas occasionally offered a word, never overstepping, but lending weight to her claims. By nightfall the man left, grumbling, but the farm was safe. Clara exhaled, feeling the tension that had gripped her for months finally ease. She turned to Silas, who merely nodded. Words weren't necessary. Their labor, endurance, and trust had spoken for them. Later, as they sat outside, the prairie bathed in sunset, she rested her head on his shoulder. The boys played near the barn, shadows long and swaying. Ida clutched his stick like a sword, marching across the yard. Clara whispered into the warm evening air, "We made it through. Together." He wrapped an arm around her, firm but gentle. "Together," he echoed. The wind brushed across the plains, carrying with it the scent of new grass earth and the faint promise of rain. The farm, battered and resilient, stood as a testament to endurance. And in the quiet, Clara realized that the home she had feared would crumble without her husband was alive, vibrant, and filled with love. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future not dictated by loss, but built by choice, a family bound not only by necessity but by care, by shared labor, by understanding. Silas's presence, once merely helpful, had become indispensable, a quiet anchor in the vast, untamed landscape. She looked across the yard at the children and then at Silas. A smile spread across her face, slow and steady. The burdens of the past, the loneliness, the endless struggle, all were still present, but lighter, shared, made bearable. They had survived, yes, but more than that, they had built something enduring: trust, love, and a home. As the last light faded from the horizon, Clara felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with fire. It was hope, steady and true, like roots growing deep into the earth beneath her feet. And for the first time in a long while, she believed that nothing, not even the wind, couldn't do what they had forged together. Summer settled over Drought Creek with a quiet, relentless heat. The sun hung heavy in the sky, making the prairie shimmer in waves of gold and green. Clara rose before dawn most days, hands raw from work in the fields, but each morning felt lighter than the last. Silas was already moving by the time she drew her first breath of air, checking fences, tending the animals, or repairing tools. The children ran with unrestrained joy, their laughter carrying across the fields. James had begun to show an interest in the land, helping Silas plow small plots with an enthusiasm that surprised Clara. Eli followed, curious and eager, though less skilled. Ida, now walking steadily, toddled behind the boys, calling out names of imagined creatures that ran in the tall grass. One evening, after the chores were done and the children had fallen asleep, Clara and Silas sat on the porch. The fire in the hearth crackled through the open door, casting shadows that danced on the walls. Silas pulled a small sketchbook from his coat pocket, one he had been keeping since winter. He showed Clara the drawings, lines of fences, barns, animals, and the hills beyond. "These are good," Clara said softly. "You've been keeping them all this time?" He nodded. "It helps to remember what's been fixed and what still needs care." She studied the drawings, noticing the small details: a broken fence, a leaning barn post, a crooked window frame, each carefully rendered. She realized then that he had been watching the farm, the children, and her, in ways that words could never capture. "You see things most people miss," she said. "Some things you can't fix with hands," he replied. "You fix them with patience." She looked at him, and for the first time, the words she had kept locked inside her chest for months surfaced. "I don't think I could have survived this without you," she whispered. He placed a hand over hers, warm and steady. "You wouldn't have to. You'd have done it. But I'm glad I was here." They sat in silence, watching the fireflies flicker in the twilight. The air smelled of earth, grass, and the faint tang of smoke. It was a small, perfect moment, fragile and fleeting, yet so full of promise. Then came the challenge that had been lurking like a shadow, the unexpected arrival of Orson Hale once again. This time he came with more than words. He brought a group of men from the town, claiming rights over part of the fawn, insisting that Clara had overstepped some old boundary. Their voices carried across the yard, harsh and unforgiving. Clara's chest tightened, but she refused to falter. Silas came to her side, standing shoulder to shoulder. The men scoffed, expecting fear or retreat, but instead they found determination, a quiet, unyielding force. "This land belongs to us," Clara said, voice steady, meeting each glare. "We've worked it, we've cared for it, and we're not leaving." Silas stepped forward. "Just right. You can argue, you can threaten, but we've earned it, fair and square." The man hesitated, seeing the resolve in both of them, the unity that could not be broken by threats or intimidation. Slowly, one by one, they turned and left, muttering under their breath. Orson Hale lingered last, his eyes cold but powerless against the bond he could not undo. After the men departed, Clara sank onto the porch, exhausted. Silas knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "You did well," he said simply. "So did you," she replied. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of amber and rose. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt a peace that wasn't borrowed from circumstance, but earned through struggle, trust, and shared courage. The days that followed were filled with steady labor, laughter, and quiet companionship. Silas and Clara continued to work the land, each act of care strengthening not just the farm but their bond. The children thrived, learning the rhythms of the earth, the value of work, and the safety found in love and trust. One evening, Silas leaned against the porch railing, watching the stars appear, one by one. Clara joined him, feeling the warmth of his presence, the solidity of his commitment. "We've made it through," she said softly. He nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Together," he said. And in the twilight, the farm, the house, and the family stood united against the vast, untamed frontier, a testament to resilience, to love born from shared struggle, and to the quiet strength that rises from enduring the worst the world can offer. Late summer settled like a lullaby. The heat still pressed hard at midday, but the mornings came cool and slow, the kind of air that made Clara think of beginnings. The wheat fields rolled like quiet gold under the sun, and the barn no longer leaned, not just repaired, but upright, like it remembered how to stand. In the yard Ida toddled through rows of sunflowers Silas had planted in spring without a word. They bloomed tall and wide now, heads heavy with sea. James trailed behind her, careful, proud in the way big brothers are. Eli sat under the sycamore, sketching the mule in a tattered notebook Silas had given him. Inside, Clara stood over the stove, stirring peach preserves into jars, sweat on her brow and contentment in her bones. She paused, hand on her belly, the smallest flutter, not imagined, real. She smiled. That evening, when the children were sleeping and the moon hung low over the hills, she found Silas behind the barn, mending a stirrup in the dim light. She leaned in the doorway, watching the calm surety of his hands, the familiar way he set things right. "I want to show you something," she said. He looked up. "Oh, Ray." She led him back to the porch, where the lantern flickered beside a folded scrap of linen. She handed it to him, a tiny square of white cloth stitched around the edges in pink thread. Silas stared for a moment. "Is this?" She nodded, heart thumping. "We'll need a new cradle come spring." For a long moment he didn't move, didn't speak. Then he sat beside her, slow and quiet, as though the weight of the moment might tip over if they weren't careful. "I never thought I'd have another family," he said. "Not after all of it." "Me either," she said. "But here we are." Silas turned toward her, eyes glinting in the lantern light. "I'd like to make it official." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I want to stay," he said, voice rough but certain. "Not just the work, not just the roof, all of it. I want to marry you, Clara. Not for rescue, for love, for the life we built." The words settled between them, not loud or dramatic, just steady and true. Clara's hand found his. "You already saved us," she said. "But yes, I want that too." The next week they stood under the cottonwood beside the grave of Hank Webb, and Claire held Silas's hand as the preacher from town spoke simple words. The boys wore their best shirts. Ida clung to Clara's skirt, and the air smelled of grass sweet with dew. There was no big crowd, no music, just the wind, the land, and two people who had been broken once, maybe twice, and now chose to stand not in the place of what was lost, but beside it, carrying it forward. Silas slipped a plain gold ring onto Clara's finger. She returned the gesture with one of Hank's old bands, warmed and worn smooth by years of labor. They didn't kiss then. They just stood together, facing the land. And that was enough. Weeks passed. The house grew louder with children's voices and softer with laughter. The field gave more than they'd hoped. The barn doors opened each morning with a groan, not of disrepair but of use. Silas built a cradle with his own hands. Clara painted it blue. One night after the first frost, Silas sat beside the fireplace with Ida on his lap and Deli asleep on his shoulder. Clara rested nearby, her feet swollen, her belly full of new life. The fire snapped softly. Outside, snow dusted the edges of the field. Inside, the house felt full, real, permanent. Silas looked up, meeting her eyes. "I used to think I didn't deserve a second chance," he said. Clara reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "Turns out we both did." They sat like that for a long time, the children breathing slow and steady around them, the house whispering its familiar creaks and sighs. Everything they needed was here. Later, when Clara climbed into bed, she caught sight of the cradle in the corner. It was quiet and empty now, but not for long. She smiled, placing one hand over her stomach. From the window, the wind moved through the prairie grass. Not harsh, not cold, just steady, like time itself. The house stood firm, stitched into the land and into the lives that had grown inside it. Love had not come like thunder. It had come like rain after drought. Slow, quiet, and enough.